Frank D'Onofrio, or good evening, good afternoon, evening. My name is Frank D'Onofrio, and I'm with nrmplus.com/newrightnetwork.com. And today we were supposed to have a debate. Unfortunately, um, all of the debaters from for the New Jersey Republican nomination for Senate declined to attend. We did offer the debate to everyone. Rick Mehta, and who is supposedly the leader at this particular point in time, and her Singh, and two other candidates, and they decided not to attend. It's sad because in the tradition of our country, debate has been in the forefront of our hallmark of our country. That is what the First Amendment is all about. What we're here to do is to debate issues with one another. And then what will happen is that the voter ultimately gets the choice to vote for whomever they feel has their best interests at heart. No one showed up. And it's disheartening for me. I have issued a tweet. Tricia, I'm going to make you laugh a little bit. If anybody had watched the movie Rocky 3, you'd know that Rocky's manager, Mighty Mick, would not allow Rocky to fight Clubber Lang because he felt that he would lose the fight. He was overmatched. And so I'm calling Rick/Mick, because he obviously feels he's overmatched by my guest tonight. My guest is Tricia Flanagan. She also is running for New Jersey Republican for Senate in the great state of New Jersey. And I'm welcoming Trish tonight to nrmplus.com/newrightnetwork.com. And we are also being simulcast by the Vets for Trump. So Tricia, welcome.
Well, thank you, Frank, and thank you to all your viewers for tuning in. Thank you, Vets for Trump. You know, I come from a military family. My dad, career Navy. My grandfather fought in World War I. So vets have a very special place near and dear to my heart. But I showed up. I believe that the voters deserve to hear from their U.S. Senate candidates, and not just New Jerseyans, but because this is a federal seat and U.S. senators have the power to affect policy for all America, this is something that's especially important. These are candidates that should be heard, and I'm here. I'm the only one that seems to care enough about the voters of New Jersey and the people of America to come and talk to them, hear from them and their questions, and to answer to we the people. So thank you for having me on, and thank you for hosting me.
That's fine, Tricia. And I'm going to encourage any of the candidates, if they'd like at this late point in time, to contact me. My Twitter handle is at Captain Elvis3. If you could see my Elvis memorabilia behind me, kind of gives you a layout of that. At Captain Elvis3. Send me a tweet. I'll be glad to, at this late moment, to see if we can fit you in. We got an hour with you, Tricia. Just you and I going mano a mano and talking about the issues.
My pleasure. I'm ready.
I'm going to hit you with the first one because the first one's very sad. Okay. Obviously, what happened in Minneapolis is probably one of the worst examples of the bad in America that we've ever seen. Well, not the worst, but it's one of the worst. Okay. But we live in a great country, and this is the point that I offer people. We live in a country in which that if we make a mistake, we're willing to, one, admit the mistake, two, own up to the mistake, and three, figure out something to do about it. And we do live in a great country in which we can present our redress to our government. That's a First Amendment right, freedom of speech and the ability to present our redress to our government. What's not in the First Amendment is presenting our redress to our government and burning down the house or the houses of the people in the neighborhood. That is not part of the U.S. Constitution. And so you're right across from my hometown, which is New York. Okay. I've got pictures. My wife has shown me pictures of our neighborhood that is getting burned down as we speak. That are people in the street, 25, thousands and thousands all over this country. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know if you saw my event on Friday night discussing what happened. We were live and things were happening in front of us. And to be honest with you, at that point in time, it was very clear that it was orchestrated, because nothing happens that precisely at the same time without it being orchestrated. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes since I pontificated, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to say your piece and kind of come into the next situation, which is not, what happened, but basically what we do next. So go ahead.
Sure. I mean, this is a dark moment in our nation's history. It's a dark moment for those who want peace and justice to be served. The framework that you talked about is how people behave when they're operating from a base of integrity. And sadly, it went from protesters to violent rioters. We have a right to assemble, as you outlined in our First Amendment, but when it leaps into rioting and destruction and all of the things that are the hallmark of Antifa, we see this again and again. Now, regardless of where it's originating, the reality is that where it's landing is a very, very dangerous place for us to be as Americans, not just in terms of physical safety and harm, because that's occurring. We heard a police officer has died. That will not bring George Floyd back. That was a horrific moment for one of the darkest moments in our nation's history. That man should never have been put in that situation. He died a horrific death, and we see it over and over again on the television, and our nation sobs, and I sob with them. But then to take that to a place where then rioting becomes the justification for what these feelings are being brought into the forefront of impact on our businesses, people who had nothing to do with that death. That's what's so sad. And George Floyd's own brother said, he's calling for sanity. He said, that's not going to bring his brother back. That doesn't do justice to his brother's memory. So we cry as a nation, but we also implore the return to justice and rule of law. And that's why I agree so fervently and firmly with what our president has said. We need this to be a moment of return to law and order. We have to have a swift and strong response. And the reality is the governors who are standing down, who are telling police officers to take a knee in the presence of criminal behavior, that is something that is just going to continue to destroy the fabric of our country. We're better than that. George Floyd was better than that, and he deserves better than that. We as a country need to come back to a place where peace and justice will prevail. And I'm glad to be part of that solution.
Tricia, let me talk to you something about that. When your child misbehaves, okay, you have children. I have children, okay? And your child misbehaves, and you do nothing about it. What's the next thing that happens?
Well, it just reinforces the behavior. So they do it again and again, and then it becomes a stronger and stronger response.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so what we've done is we've said that we're not going to do anything to you, and you can murder, because I have a picture here. I'm sorry I didn't get it to Obi in time, but Patrick Underwood was a federal officer in Oakland on Friday night. They killed him. Patrick Underwood was black. Okay. He was black. Why is his life not worth as much as George Floyd? And the bottom line is that the conversation is not that one life is worth more than another. Okay. And I remember a while back, I heard former Governor O'Malley said all lives matter, and they got all on his back and yelled at him, and and it's like, okay. But the bottom line is that if my child's life is in danger, I'm going to defend my child's life. And so all of these things happening is just an example of people. Well, I mean, I used to think that in the 60s, I used to think that that my generation was spoiled. Boy, I tell you, that cuts the cake compared to this generation. This generation today spoiled, and if they don't get their way, they will pretty much guarantee that they'll burn the house down if they don't get it. Comment.
Well, I think that, this underscores the difference between perspectives, I think, with the far left and those who are conservative, who are Republicans, who are thinking about the better angels of our society. We've seen progressive liberalism at its worst here. It's synonymous with the kind of actions that we're seeing right now with these riots. The only solution is to try to move away from acting out feelings and allowing that to be tolerated. And that's why I go back to that strong and swift and severe reaction that we need from our policymakers, from our government officials. We need to have a united front, and President Trump is leading that way, talking about making sure that we return to a nation of law and order. So that underscores exactly the issue of the 2020 elections. What kind of country do we want to see? Do we want more of the same? Can you imagine if Joe Biden were leading the country right now? We would be worse. Talk about going from the frying pan into the fire. No, what we need to underscore these issues. We need to have a swift and serious vetting of our candidates. And it goes full circle back to why we need to hear from each and every candidate who is going to affect policy, especially on a national level. 2020 elections are about the battle of the heart, for the heart and soul of America. I'm fighting for the heart and soul of New Jersey. We have to have clear vision. 2020 means perfect vision, right? Well, we need to take that clear vision to the voting booth, evaluate candidates on their strength to reestablish law and order. And I'm committed to do that. And that's why I'm asking not just for your vote and support, but to walk with me on this journey to make sure that the primary is equally as important as the general. And we take out Cory Booker in New Jersey, and we establish what I like to call a MAGA majority across all of Congress to support that law and order position that is critically important right now. 2020 is our chance to do that.
Before we change subjects, because we'll go off of this subject, but one of the things I want to bring out is you and I are essentially around the same age. I'm sorry. You look better for your age than I do, but that's okay. But and we remember the 60s, the 70s. Okay, we remember the civil unrest. Okay, remember the upset in the streets. I was very young. I know you were very young at the time, but we remember it. It's not that it's not that it was something that passes by. We might have been very young children, but still was something that was going on. And we saw this unrest in the streets, and we saw people getting water cannons, at them, and so on and so forth. And it was bad. But the bottom line is, before that occurred, change started happening. And that was brought up in our talk on Friday night. By the way, nrnplus.com/live. Go and see the conversation we had on Friday night about the Minnesota riots and so on and so forth with some key Black leaders in this country. Okay, and a discussion about that. And one of the things that Zalika Bazemore, who's running for Baltimore mayor, said to me was she says, I was a teenager during those times, and Martin Luther King and youngster Martin Luther King was there, and they walked arm in arm in protest. They didn't burn down buildings. They didn't destroy things. They didn't do horrible, disgusting things to people. Okay, they didn't kill people. As a matter of fact, one of the premises of Dr. King was civil disobedience. This is not civil disobedience. This is far from. It's the exact opposite of civil disobedience. And the thing about civil disobedience is that if, and Gandhi preached it as well, if one was to get hit and do the thing that Christ said, which is give him the other cheek, at some point, the person that hits you gives up and realizes the error of their ways. At this particular point in time, nobody's giving up and everybody's escalating and escalating beyond until everybody's upset and outraged. And, when everybody's upset and outraged, this is what you get. And cities are being burned down and so on and so forth. And the question for the youth of America is this the legacy that you want for your children? Because I do know that in the 60s and the 70s, I do know this, that I can look back at the marches in Selma and Martin Luther King and say, wow, that was an amazing time. I'm not sure that I'm going to look back at this week and say, wow, that's an amazing time. So your opinion.
Well, here's the issue. I mean, when we look back at that chaos, and there was violence then, and when we lead up to when it started to settle down, the pivotal moment was really in the 1972 elections when Richard Nixon was elected. And when we look at the path that our country took from there, I think that we can look at the peaks and the valleys, because after what happened with President Nixon, with the Watergate hearings, with the resignation, we saw Gerald Ford take office, and then we saw Jimmy Carter years. And when the pattern emerges that when we have a Democrat in charge, we have a loosening of these law and order convictions and results. And whether we like Richard Nixon or not, we could debate his presidency for days. But the bottom line is he ran also on a law and order platform. And that was a stabilizing factor. And then after Jimmy Carter, when we saw the debacle that happened there, everything from the rising gas prices to the civil unrest that resulted in some ways as a result of some of his policies. And then with the situation with the hostages in Iran, then we saw Ronald Reagan enter, and we saw a return to America's greatness, American conservatism, and American law and order again. And whether you want to look, through history and pick out Rudy Giuliani, who restored New York and brought it back from the brink of violence, at every juncture, it brings us back to the core issue of the 2020 elections. Again, law and order, a return to peace, a return to justice. These are critical elements that keep our society functioning in a way to protect our citizens. We have to mete out justice, but we have to make sure that it's within the framework of, again, a strong response. That's what we have to remember going into the voting booth. I'm a candidate that stands with all of those principles. I'm a true conservative. I stand with ICE. We have, all of our other problems haven't gone away. New Jersey is still down the path, as a sanctuary state. We have immigration issues that we have to address. We have our economy that has to get jump started. I am the only candidate who has fully fleshed out policies to address all of these issues that's really going to make America this better place to be, right? We have to support our president. I am that law and order candidate on the U.S. Senate level. And I'm just sorry that my other candidates my other opponents, the other candidates in this race, do not care enough about these issues to stand up, be counted, and be heard, and be accountable to the American people. But I am.
Tricia, it must be because I'm such a hard interviewer. that they don't want to face me. I don't know. I'm gonna go down another path with you for a second, and the path I'm going to go down is something that you brought up a couple seconds ago, and that is the Second Amendment. Okay, because it's truly important. The left keeps telling us that one of the things that we should do is give up our gun rights to protect ourselves, and they will protect us. And then we see that the police departments of this nation are not standing up to these thugs, and I'll call them that, these thugs that are going and ruining and ruining neighborhoods, okay, and destroying neighborhoods and destroying the very people. So my question is, if you give up your right to defend yourself here, and there's no one left here to defend you, then what happens?
Well, see, this is one of the critical elements of my Constitution Caucus initiative, to make sure that we not only protect our constitutional rights that are dwindling, but we restore those that really have been taken away, measure by measure. And so the Second Amendment, it's pretty clear. It shall not be infringed. It's in the very language of the amendment. So what's happened? Well, the first thing that you talked about is, is it the police force's job to protect us bodily, to protect our lives? Now, we have this false sense of security that the police are there and that they will come and they'll get there in time. And the reality is there's even a Supreme Court ruling that says at the heart, a police officer does not have to, they're not obligated to protect you. Shocking, right? Now, they do in most cases. And when you call the police on the phone, they do their best to get there. But the reality is that we as Americans have, in the language of our Constitution, inalienable rights. And one of those, and one of the amendments on which everything else hinges, right, is the Second Amendment. How much clearer can "it shall not be infringed" be? But yet, we see this constant erosion of that most sacred right. Look, I'm going to tell a quick story, that I think will illustrate bringing the point home, and how ridiculous it has gotten in our country, coming against this very basic right. When I was growing up, my mother loved cats, and we had several cats throughout my childhood. And cats claw things, right? I have two cats now, and they do that. But you keep their nails trimmed, right? But the question comes up sometimes: should they be declawed? And my mother taught me, she said, you know what? Because the question came up in our household. And she said, that would be cruel, not just because of what it does to the cat when the nails are removed, but she said, if the cat ever got out, that cat wouldn't be able to defend itself. And it's sort of, if an animal has a right to defend itself, which I believe they do, they have, God made it with claws. How much more so do we as American citizens have a right, this basic right of self-defense? If someone threatens you bodily, you have a right to defend yourself with a firearm. If our forefathers didn't envision it that way, it wouldn't have been written in our Constitution. It's that simple. But I'll take it one step further, because you know the language just as well as I do. It's also about a militia. We have a right to form a militia. It's about the tyranny that can come against an individual citizen or citizens by their own government. That was part of our forefounders' vision as well for that amendment. And so, we lack a spine sometimes in our country. Our legislators are afraid to speak up. Well, you know what? We need someone bold enough and brave enough to make this argument on the U.S. Senate floor to, again, not just protect our right, Second Amendment and all the others that hinge upon it, but to restore what has been unrightly taken from us. I am that candidate. I'm speaking up about it. I was just at a rally this last weekend, and I spoke fervently about it. I'm the only one in New Jersey, the only U.S. Senate candidate who's doing that. And that's why it's so critical to keep that in mind. Please, when you go into the voting booth on July 7th in this primary, to elect this GOP candidate, who will take on Cory Booker, this issue has to be first and foremost, because if we don't win now, it's gone.
I agree. The founders of our Constitution were very, very, very intelligent, smart men. By the way, I'm going to dispose some of this stuff because I'm going to dispose the item that people have been talking about in terms of that our Constitution is tainted because because of the fact that we had slavery in the United States. Because I want to dispose of that just for a second. Okay, there are 13 colonies in the United States, 13 British colonies that became the United States of America. Well, other than the southern colonies of Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, every other colony was free. Every other colony did not have slavery. Okay, so only three out of the 13. So the other 10. So it's saying that the United States Constitution was founded by people who were racist is a disgusting claim, first of all. Second of all, they were intelligent enough to put the most important aspects of our Constitution first and second. The first was the freedom of speech, and then the freedom to defend oneself.
Mhm.
Okay? So you can't have one without the other. You can't have a freedom of speech without defending your freedom. Go ahead.
Well, they're all inalienable, right? And again, that's written into the language. But I really want to address that notion of, the argument that we throw everything out because there were some elements of slavery when our country was founded. Well, let's look at where we landed. We were also the country that abolished slavery.
Yep.
We were also and quite frankly, the Republican Party specifically was the party that stood for and finally did abolish slavery, stood against slavery and abolished it. If we want to look and judge every country, every law by what it was at its inception, I mean, look at how rampant it was in the world to begin with. That it's not about where it started, it's about where we ended up and the progress that we have made. And we are a country that sees how egregious slavery is and
Yes.
was. It can never be justified, but let's look at how America stood for truth, stood for freedom, and were really at the forefront of making sure that it was known and accepted that all are created equal. That's in the language of our founding documents as well. And that's what we need to focus on. Can we be better? We can always be better. We should always be striving to be better every day. Our policymakers should keep that in mind. Our legislation should get better and better every day. But we have to look at where we're going and not throw out everything that America is and has accomplished because of how we started. We have been the voice of freedom. We are the voice of freedom in the world, and that's why we're a world power today.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I made an error. I forgot to add Georgia, so it's 4 out of 13, but 9 out of the 13 colonies were not. But getting into this a little bit further, and then we'll dispose of this one. The most important thing about our country is that without the Constitution of the United States, freedom would have never occurred.
Exactly.
Okay? Without the inalienable rights, without the ability to redress your government, without the ability for freedom of speech, without all of those pieces of the U.S. Constitution, we would not be having the freedoms that we so much have today. And listen, you and I cannot talk about what it is to be a Black American. It just doesn't exist for us. It's not who we are. It's not in our background. So I can't talk about how they feel and what they should be feeling. And it's not a conversation that I'm going to have. They have a right to how they feel. The same as if you are wronged, you have a right to what you feel. What I'm saying is how they're dealing with this and how they want to deal with it is not something that I can feel comfortable with, but I don't want to deal with that. I want to say, how do we heal? Okay, we're here. I get it. I heard you. At what point do we say, how do we heal? And if there's no place for healing, then we can't do it.
Well, and justice is part of that. And that's why, when we that's what our justice system is meant to be, right? It's supposed to take the feelings, if you will. I mean, our justice system takes into account what the party that was wronged, looks at all of the evidence, takes testimony, evaluates the evidentiary support for the claims that are being made, the charges that are being put forth. There's a plaintiff, there's a defendant. Our justice system, is it perfect? No. But is it the best example? Is it the shining example of justice that we have in our world today? Absolutely. And that is why there is a process. That is why our country embraces the justice and has evolved into the justice system that we have, because we look at the rights in, just as you said, that blind fashion. And that's where we take all the feelings that are raw and that are real, but we put it in a place where justice will be served. It should be swift and severe there too. But what it does is it takes that collective universe of feelings and puts it through the judicial process. And that protects the societal impact that we're seeing right now. A lot of the business owners that are suffering from the riots and the looting are exactly the communities that need to heal from this fracture. And, we have to bring it back to a sane and just place. And that's what I'm committed to doing. We need legislators who understand that and who are bold and brave enough to argue for it and make sure that that's the path we take, not a path to destruction, but a path to solutions and an American system that works.
Absolutely. So let's change a little bit and talk about some of the things that you as a United States Senator would have on your plate almost immediately if you were to become a U.S. Senator. So probably one of the first things that you're going to have to deal with, or at least sometime in the next 4 years, is replacing a member of the Supreme Court of the United States. And so, understanding what's in front of you, and understanding all the things that our country is dealing with, give me a couple of reasons why, as United States Senator, your choice. Who would be your choice for Supreme Court judge? I'm not saying a specific person, but give me the political and not even political, the attributes of a Supreme Court justice. Take politics out of it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And certainly, there is a list already, and there are individuals that are already their names being swirled around, because like you said, there is most likely there could be retirements. We wish, everyone long life on the Supreme Court, but the reality is that there are a number of justices that have also talked about retirement. And so there will be a live issue for a Supreme Court appointment in coming legislative sessions, I'm certain. We need to look no further than the most recent Supreme Court decision that came down that made a decision about religious liberty in our country. And Justice Roberts made, in my opinion, one of the worst Supreme Court votes. He tipped the balance, and I think this is one of the worst Supreme Court decisions in our nation's history. It really takes a bite out of our religious liberty, and really tees up how important it's going to be to get conservative justices to join Neil Gorsuch and Justice Brett Kavanaugh to make sure that we tip the balance in favor of the Constitution, because that's really what's at stake. When we talk about conservative justices, what we're really talking about is we want to make sure we have justices on the Supreme Court who look at their pending decisions through a constitutionally protective lens. That is something that should be baked into the heart of how we evaluate justices. Sadly, it currently is not. And so, whatever names are teed up, there are some great names that stand to be evaluated by the U.S. Senate, and that's another vision of our forefathers. That task has been put squarely on the U.S. Senate, and I think it's a real critical time to return to the honor and dignity of the process. When you look at my intended opponent, Cory Booker himself, he claimed his Spartacus moment, and he not only shamed himself, he not only drug a wonderful man's name through the mud unnecessarily, but he shamed the entire United States Senate. And my vision would not just be to be able to cast a vote for a conservative, constitutionally protected Supreme Court justice, but it would be my honor to be part of restoring the dignity that should have always been part of the United States Senate in that process.
Tricia, I would love if somebody took Cory Booker apart at the level that they took Justice Kavanaugh apart, okay? Because I can guarantee you put them both side by side, and Justice Kavanaugh would be coming out as unscathed, whereas I do not believe Cory Booker would, in my opinion. No, not with his background.
My goal is just to send Cory Booker home, find another job. In my opinion, he was never qualified to be a U.S. Senator, the United States Senator, to begin with. And we could go through a litany of reasons why. My intent is to take him to that task in a debate when we get to the general election. And believe me, I will, and I'm already prepared for that. But in the meantime, the goal is what we cannot lose sight of, and that is to find Cory Booker another line of work, because I'm sure there's something else he's qualified for. It's certainly not the United States Senate.
Well, maybe he could be on the Tonight Show or something. He could do the Tonight Show. I don't think they want him though. Here's the question that I have for you, and that would be, if Cory Booker had his Spartacus moment again on the on a debate stage and said that he understood women, okay, as much as he said that, I really would love to hear your response to that question.
Well, I look forward to it. And, I mean, it's laughable because, Cory Booker, what he does is he wants to tell women that they have no right to protect their own children. He says that real men protect women's rights. And I have said time and again, no, Mr. Booker, real men protect innocent children in the womb, and they support the women who want to make sure that life is protected. Life is sacred. It is in our Constitution. Speaking of horrific Supreme Court justice decisions, Roe v. Wade is the worst moment in our nation's Supreme Court history. And fortunately, we will have another, actually two chances, I believe, in coming legislative sessions to take the biggest fight out of Roe v. Wade that we've had since 1973 when it passed, and that's the Born Alive bill and the Heartbeat bill. Both of those bills stand to come to the United States Senate floor, and I'm honored to have many, many amazing right to life endorsements. One of the honors of my life is that Bishop Rene Henry Gracida, who was dear friends with St. Pope John Paul II, who was dear friends with Mother Angelica, the founder of the EWTN Catholic Network, has endorsed me. He prayerfully supports me, and amongst other pro-life organizations, that is one of the biggest honors of my life. And my commitment is to join the 34% even of Democrats who are pro-life Catholics in my state. New Jersey has the second highest population of Catholics in the United States, second only to Rhode Island. This is a place where Democrats, Republicans, anyone who cherishes life can meet with us on this issue. And I can tell you, unlike any of my other opponents, I am ready to fight for those precious tiny lives. And most importantly, on a practical level, I'm ready to fight for those two critical bills. Again, the Born Alive bill and the Heartbeat bill. When they come to the United States Senate floor, we need a United States senator who will champion for our unborn, and I am that candidate.
Well, one of the people that is endorsing you at this particular point in time is Lieutenant Stephen Rogers. Is that correct? And he was on our show a couple weeks ago and talking about why he felt that it was important to endorse you. He's now, in Nutley. So talk to me about Lieutenant Rogers and what that endorsement means to you.
Oh, well, speaking of honors of a lifetime, I mean, that is one that I absolutely cherish. I'm so honored to be endorsed by Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, who is he is on the President Trump Campaign Advisory Board. He, as you mentioned, I mean, his list of credentials are long and amazing. He was a police detective. He was a part of the FBI Joint Task Force on Terrorism. This is a man who knows the dangers of this world, who has served his country, who serves us now alongside, again, on the President Trump Advisory Board. This is an endorsement that is coveted and cherished. And I'm so honored that Lieutenant Rogers has spoken up for me as who he believes will be the best person to fill that U.S. Senate seat. Look, we have times ahead of us that are unprecedented in our country on many levels, on a worldwide level, and then all the way down to a state level. And I am ready for that task. And I'm just so honored that Lieutenant Rogers has said that and believes that as well. So thank you, Lieutenant Rogers. And I look forward to serving our country in this wonderful United States Senate capacity.
Absolutely. I'm going to go a little bit more into some of your background and history. one of the things that the social media has been joking about is the fact that all of a sudden we were focused on stay at home, social distancing, stay at home, and now all of a sudden, I see all these thousands of people out in the streets. I don't see many of them wearing masks. Oh, excuse me. I see the rioters and the ones that are causing problems wearing masks. All the other people, I don't see them wearing masks. And then the other piece of the puzzle is I don't see them out there having that social distancing to one another. And what we're going to learn in a couple of weeks is either the social distancing didn't mean anything, okay, or the coronavirus was a big deal, because a lot of people who are out there in the streets are going to fall ill to the coronavirus. Since you have a background in medicine and so on and so forth, and pharmacology, talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, there are so many elements, so many moving pieces to this. It's the juncture where policy meets healthcare, and we need scientists at this task. And as you mentioned, I'm a biochemist. I spent a lot of years behind a microscope, and I like to lead with the real science. There's a lot of junk science out there. There's a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding, even by some of the health professionals at the highest levels of this equation. And what I see is I evaluate the data. You know me well enough to know I love to pour through the data. So let's lead with that. Let's look at the recent New England Journal of Medicine article on the 21st of May that in its opening excerpt talks about how masks are unnecessary. The bottom line is, outside of a clinical setting, they really offer no protection. And in fact, I would argue, if you might have seen everybody from AOC to some of, I think, Nancy Pelosi, some of the Democrats that insist on wearing a mask on camera, you might have seen that when they start to slip, they start adjusting it. Well, the way you get COVID-19 is it's to mucous membranes. So if you've touched anything and now you're touching your face, you're actually in a worse position than you would have been without a mask. And that same New England Journal of Medicine article talks about the fact that we now know most medical professionals are in agreement on this, and the data supports it, that to get COVID-19, you have to be in an enclosed space. You have to be within more like inches rather than 6 feet for a prolonged period of time. Some studies say 10 minutes, some say as long as 30 minutes. And so if you are not in that direct contact with a person who is infected, your chances of getting COVID-19 are very, very slim. And that's not me saying that solely. That is the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm glad to post the article on my social media. It was May 21st of this year, just this May 21st, a week ago, that this was published. And the article actually goes so far as to say that this mask wearing exercise is really more to give a sense of security to those who have anxiety about catching COVID-19, nothing more. So where does that leave us? Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Define. Where does it leave us? Where do we go at this particular point in time? Okay, we've stayed home for months. Okay, and we've pretty much taken a significant number of our businesses and thrown them upside down and said, you're done. Now where do we go?
Well, see, that's critical. And again, let's unpack some more data. So when we look at the numbers, yes, we did finally tip over 100,000 deaths. But let's look at where those numbers came from. Now, I want to preface this by saying, of course, every death is a tragedy. But when we look at everything in life, everything in life has risk to it, right? So when we look at those, let's use the round number of 100,000. It's a little bit more, but of those 100,000 deaths, about 50% were in nursing homes. So when you take out that population, you're looking at about 50,000 deaths. Again, one is one too many, but in a bad flu season, we sometimes see more than 50,000 deaths. Now, when we look at that other population, for a significant age-centric part of the population, this is a deadly virus. The average age of death. One study says 81, one is 85. But for that subset of the population, for that vulnerable older population who have concomitant underlying medical issues, cardiovascular disease, respiratory issues, diabetes, those are the most vulnerable. And for that population, this disease is deadly. But when we look at the totality of impact, let's also consider that now we just had some readjustment of the numbers. The deaths that resulted from this outbreak were, it was 0.3% of the population that got it died. That means over 99% recovered. And for 50% of those that contracted COVID, they were asymptomatic. So when you balance that, again, everything has risk. Public policy has to be crafted with that in mind. And, look, when you're taking businesses away from Americans, when you send more armed forces to shut down a beauty salon and a gym than you sent to save American lives in Benghazi, we've tipped the balance into a very, very dark place. And what's the end point of this? The end point of shutting down businesses is not only taking away constitutional rights of Americans. That's a whole other issue that has to be prevented. But we also see that the end point is people are going to die of, the suicide rate is up, something like 2,000%. We have people who are losing their businesses, losing their livelihoods. Depression is setting in. We have, people, what is the end point? Starvation kills 100% of those affected, not 0.3%. So we have to look at this entire response, especially when we are crafting public policy. We have to look at this through the lens of real data, real science. All of the data is pointing in the direction that we can safely open America without any serious impact to the health of America. And in fact, those states like Georgia and Florida who have opened with sound policy like I'm talking about are doing fine. Let's look at what works. Let's make policy through the lens of sanity, and let's get America open again.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your race that's going on now. Okay, you're running against Rick Mehta, Hersh Singh, and a couple of other candidates that aren't showing up in the numbers. Now, we do know that there are approximately 1.7 million or 1.6 million New Jersey Republicans out there. Right?
Go ahead.
In that number, in that area. Okay. Knowing that there's that many voting, how many you think are going to cast their ballots? And then the next step is, how do you think you're going to do?
Okay, so let me give a little background here. So you started in your opening statement by calling Rick Mehta the front runner, and I want to beg to differ with that, because what he has done is he has gotten the count.
I should say self-proclaimed front runner. That should be
self-proclaimed front runner. And when you look at the county lines, let's take this in parcels. So when you look at the county lines, Hersh Singh and Rick Mehta have divvied those up a bit, but that only represents 3% of the vote. Of the voting universe. That's about 200 people that sit in a back room and make the county line deals. And that's how we end up with losing candidates. We haven't had a Republican at the federal level in New Jersey for 48 years. And what happens is these backroom deals go on, a couple hundred people decide who's going to get the lines, and then they want everyone to vote accordingly. The people that come out are usually the establishment franchise, and then they elect in the primary a very lukewarm GOP candidate, and then they go on to lose in the general, because most of New Jersey voters, what happens is they decide to sit back and they say, I'm not going to go and vote for a Democrat with a D next to their name and a Democrat with an R next to their name. Instead, they stay home and they plan their exit from New Jersey. Let's go to the numbers that you just discussed. And I'm going to make the argument as to why I'm the front runner with We the People. The reality is that the number that you mentioned, it's actually 1.2 million registered Republicans in New Jersey, and there are 2.1 million registered Democrats. So it looks like we're outnumbered, but we're not, the game changer resides in the 2.4 million independent voters. They're called unaffiliated in New Jersey. And those voters, even Gallup shows that they skew conservative. The real opportunity for New Jersey is that we've been blue by voter turnout, not by voter demographics. We're unique. I believe we're the only state in the country that actually has Democrat representation, but actually is a conservative state. But the question is, what's going to be necessary to unlock that treasure trove of voters who are going to be ready to come to the polls now and vote for Tricia Flanagan? I've been asking people all over the state to find Flanagan on the ballot so you can fight with Flanagan in Washington, D.C. to recoup our rights and to get our economy thriving again and accomplish all of America's agenda that we've just been talking about. Here is the reality. If we all vote together in one loud voice in the primary, as well as in the general on November 3rd, that July 7th primary becomes critically important because that's when we decide if we're going to send yet another rhino, lukewarm Republican into the general election, or if we're going to stand our conservative ground and pick a candidate who can actually win. And I'm the only true conservative in this race. I am the only one who is being endorsed by everyone from Lieutenant Rogers, as we just discussed, to I've gotten an endorsement from Anthony Calandro, who is not only a national NRA board member, but he's the very voice of the Second Amendment in New Jersey. I've been endorsed by Virginia Krieger and Marian Mendoza, two angel moms who know how important it is to address national security through border security. The endorsements keep coming in from real conservatives for Tricia Flanagan, not for any of the others. If they want to say that they're the front runner because they got 200 people or so in a room to say, this is who we're going to put on the line, just like they've done for the past 48 losing years, then go for it. They can have that distinction. But when you look at a recent poll, Monmouth University, which is a pretty definitive poll, they looked at who could beat Cory Booker. They looked at Rick Mehta and Hirsch Singh. Both of them lose to Cory Booker in a general election by nearly 30 points. I am the only conservative, the true conservative in this race. I am the one who is crisscrossing our state. I'm the one that's been reaching out to the voters, not to the establishment, for the past 2 years. And that kind of momentum, in my humble opinion, I would like to make the argument that that's what makes me the front runner with We the People. And let's face it, that's what it's going to take to win.
I'll be honest with you. And I think I mentioned this to you as well. I felt that Hugen running against Menendez was a bad choice because Hugen did not have, as you said, the Republican the Republican concepts of right to life, of conservatism. Okay, and they stayed home. And they stayed home. I'm not voting for this guy. I don't care if Menendez. I get Menendez, at least the devil I know is better than the devil I don't know sometimes. But we've got to get, in order for you to win, you have to get your voters out. So what's your plan?
Mm-hmm. So, and I'd like to underscore what you just said also by, Bob Hugen, he ran as a Republican, and once he got the nomination, came out and said that he was pro-choice and that he was not going to support President Trump. He called that being a new kind of Republican, but we kind of call that a Democrat. Any way you slice it. He spent $50 million to lose by 12 points. And it was exactly as you discussed. Those voters stayed home. Same thing happened in the 2017 gubernatorial race with Kim Guadagno. And that's how we got Governor Phil Murphy, arguably the worst governor in our country right now. So what's the plan for victory? So I've been pouring through the numbers for 2 years now. I have put a proprietary predictive analytic model at the disposal of my campaign. I've invested over $400,000 of my company, my own resources, something that I developed in my private life that I brought to bear for this campaign. And we have a clear pathway to victory. And ironically, the vote by mail campaign that, or the vote by mail dictum that Governor Murphy just put out. He has now said that there won't be any polling locations open on primary election day. It actually will work in our favor. And I'll tell you why. It's because, to get those voters out, the one thing that you have to do is get the message out. And before the lockdown, I was canvassing all over our state. I had people chasing us down. Somebody jumped in their pickup truck and said, I can't believe we've got a Trump supporter running for the GOP nomination. How can I get involved? We have boots on the ground in every county. We have the momentum, and the energy and enthusiasm is palpable. So that's definitely a momentum factor. But now we don't necessarily have to, as you said, get the voters out to the booth. I would prefer that. I believe that voting should always, the option of voting in person should always be there. Governor Murphy disagrees, but because all registered Republicans will be sent a ballot, then what they have to do is just find Flanagan on that ballot. And we've been getting that message out through media. I have the most comprehensive, strongest digital campaign of any of my opponents. And again, I've been building that for 2 years. They couldn't catch up now if they tried. This is the digital age of campaigning. And because I began that and focused on that before any of them were thinking about it, I'm now uniquely ready and qualified to be able to get that message out, but also to get the return in that voter enthusiasm. I think when you put those two elements together, we have the win. And that's a win that's not just a win for New Jersey, but that's a win that will benefit all America.
Before I get to the last question, let me ask this question. So what do you think the effects on the population will be in those cities that we have all these protesters pretty much close to each other on COVID-19? I mean, do you think we're going to see a spike?
Well, I think for the very reasons that we outlined in the data that we have, we see that the close proximity has to be closer than the 6 feet. It has to be exposure in a closed environment for, again, some studies say 10 minutes, some say as much as 30 minutes. So if you're in close proximity for that long with someone who has COVID, then you might be at risk. But when you're talking about these open air protests, and usually, if there's not 6 feet of distance, these people are not within inches and sharing closed spaces. Look, can you rule it out in its entirety? No. But you can't rule it out. You can't rule out anything in life. There's risk associated with everything. And I'll quickly add that we've seen enough of protests now in the open air space, because it's not just these protests that were going on. It was protests that were going on before that for Open America. We would have seen the first fruits of contamination if that really were such a live issue. The fact that we're not seeing that, really supports the evidence that most science is pointing to. And that's, not a huge risk.
Well, there was an article that Dr. Phil wrote that I wrote about at newrightnetwork.com, in which they all piled on Dr. Phil because he wasn't a medical doctor and wasn't an infectious disease doctor. Dr. Phil's perspective did not come from an infectious or medical disease perspective. His perspective was mental health. And he said, this is going to affect the mental health. I spoke to a vet the other day that told me that he's dealing with some significant problems with a lot of vets they're having. And one told me he had to talk a guy out of getting the gun out of his mouth. So these things are very, very horrible going on, and people's lives are being destroyed. And you got a governor like Governor Murphy that doesn't care about those people, doesn't care. He's going home with a paycheck every week. He's getting a paycheck. He's not being hurt by this. And the bottom line is I think that people need to understand that, and this is the same thing with the protests. Let's be honest. Like I said to you earlier, I'm not a person of color. Okay, therefore, I can't tell you how a person of color feels. In the same aspect of, but I have been a person who's been unemployed due to having my job taken away by somebody not of this country, and then saying, what am I here for? I did everything right. I checked all the boxes. I worked hard. I did where I'm supposed to go. and now I don't have a job. And in that particular instance, in that particular space, there aren't many people that can look at another person and say, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. We're getting close on time. So I want you to answer that, and then I'm going to let you go. It's always wonderful to talk to you. I think that we have an engaging conversation back and forth, and we've always had an engaging conversation, even when we talked earlier, and I wasn't on a blog. But I'll let you do the last couple of minutes, give everybody your final arguments, and then we'll close the debate off.
Sure. No, it's always my honor, Frank, and thank you to you and to New Right Network for hosting this debate, which was really a dialogue with, not just you, but the American people, which was my goal all along anyway. That I always say this is your seat and your voice, New Jersey, and this is, I mean that. This is something that I will always stay close on. I need to it has to be it shouldn't be a monologue, it should be a dialogue. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. Stay close on this journey to Election Day. And I believe that we will win again for all America. But to wrap up what you said, I did want to touch on the point that you brought up about Dr. Phil talking about the psychological impact of COVID-19. It's certainly, there's a clear mental health impact, but there's also an impact on patients of every sort. So when we look at the cancer diagnoses that are not happening, when we look at the elective surgeries that sometimes can be life-saving with with an aneurysm, you have a procedure that you can give someone many years, if not decades, of their life back if you get them on time. And we see the data coming in that everybody from cancer patients not getting their chemotherapy to these elective life-saving surgeries going undone, we see that patients are suffering, not just COVID-19 patients. And every patient has a right to treatment. That's something that I think is being sorely overlooked. But again, I land in the data. And I think that when we look at the next steps that we have to take in this journey to reopening our country and in the economic hurdles that we're going to have in front of us, when we look at everything we've discussed tonight, I have a fully developed 5-point plan for a living economy, rather than what, Democrats want a mandated living wage. That's a growth killer. My living economy plan allows New Jersey to be the next economic hub and next technology hub of our country. Again, letting New Jersey lead the way back to everything from more engineering jobs, because New Jersey graduates the most engineers of any state in our country, but also to bringing medical manufacturing back. New Jersey was a leader once there. We can be again. All of that benefits the place that Americans need to be. We need more jobs. 38 million are unemployed now. We have to create more jobs. We also have to protect American jobs from going overseas and offshoring. We did a big segment on the H-1B visa system that has to be totally revamped. And on that note, I'm honored also that I was endorsed by American Workers Coalition for exactly that position. I'm the only U.S. Senate candidate in this New Jersey race who is opposed to Senate Bill 386 that will take jobs away from Americans at a time when we need them most. Then, everything from border security to making sure that we stand with ICE and not with illegal residents. They shouldn't be getting the funds that we worked hard to put back in American hands. These are critical issues for New Jerseyans and for all America. And again, at that U.S. Senate level, this is legislation that will impact us all. I am ready for the task. I'm ready to revamp healthcare. I have my proposed American Healthcare Restoration Act that cuts premiums in half for most patients, increases access to quality care and innovative therapy, which are two different things, both of which need to be addressed. And most importantly, it gets government out of the healthcare equation where it never should have been to begin with. We will repeal and replace Obamacare in coming legislative sessions. And we've seen through history that it took one U.S. Senate vote to make sure that we didn't have a full repeal and replace in prior sessions. I'm ready to put my 25 years of healthcare experience to this critical task, as well as my experience as an entrepreneur, to make sure we get our economic lifeblood moving. Nothing is more important, and I am ready to stand up and be your voice. I ask for your vote on July 7th in New Jersey for the GOP primary. Find Flanagan on your ballot so we can fight with Flanagan together. Let's go to Washington and make a difference.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tricia Flanagan, for being my guest tonight. This is newrightnetwork.com, nrmplus.com/live. I'm your host, Frank D'Onofrio, and take it away, Obi.